Let me also welcome all of you participating in today's webinar that we at ISTP are organizing together with our partner organization, the Korea Defense Veterans Association. So thank you for the support. And of course, a particular welcome to our three eminent speakers we have today who will share their knowledge and experience with us. I will introduce them one by one more in detail later. Isn't it fantastic what modern technology can offer? We are quite a number of participants from 3 different continents joined here today for this webinar. The United Nations Command, the UNC, was established in June 1950 through the United Nations Security Council Resolution 84 to be the unified command for multinational military forces arrayed to aid South Korea during the Korean War. After the armistice was signed in 1953, the United Nations Command was given a new task to supervise the armistice and has ever since played a significant role to maintain peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. Some of the United Nations Command detailed tasks and the operational environment have, of course, changed over the years, but the fundamental mission remains. Furthermore, in the event of a reprisal of the Korean War, the UNC would, once again, serve as a multinational headquarters to coordinate additional forces deploying to the Korean Peninsula. And still today, 7 designated bases located in Japan are earmarked to support such deployments. Currently, the United Nations Command in South Korea is a multinational headquarters commanded by a US 4-star officer and with a British 3-star officer as the deputy commander, and with several of the sending states manning the UNC and its subordinated units, a true multinational effort. With ongoing discussions on an end of war declaration and the possibility of a transition of wartime operational control to the South Korean government, what is normally referred to as OPCON, this could spill over and affect the future role of the UNC. Last year, the North Korean UN representative called for a termination of UNC, also indicating it plays a role in the diplomatic developments on the peninsula. So even today, almost 72 years after its establishment, is United Nations Command still a relevant actor in maintaining peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula and supporting inter-Korean dialogue? And what does the future hold? More of the same or a significant change? To learn more about this and to better understand the complexity and the uniqueness of the Armistice Agreement, the role of the United Nations Command, and the possible consequences of an end of war declaration, we are delighted to have 3 true experts joining us today. After our 3 speakers have given their respective introduction of approximately 10 minutes each, we will have a discussion among the speakers before opening up the questions from you, the audience. We are many participating here today, and as Anna said, we will do our best to take as many questions as possible, but understandably, it will most likely not be possible to answer all of your questions. With that, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Lieutenant General retired Michael Bills. General Bills currently works as a contractor and senior control trainer for Valiant Integrated Services. His last military assignment was as Commanding General of 8th Army and Chief of Staff of the Republic of Korea US Combined Forces Command from 2018 to 20. Previously, from January 16, he served as the head of operations J3 of United Nations Command, the Combined Forces Command, and US Forces Korea. And before deploying to Korea, General Bills was commanding 1st Cavalry Division at Fort Hood in Texas from 14 to 16 and deployed with his division to Afghanistan in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. With that, Mike, I hand over the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I want to thank Major General Match Edmond and the Institute for Security and Development Policy and the Korea Defense Veterans Association, KDVA, for this opportunity to discuss this important topic of United Nations Command. Match, thanks to your service and time spent on the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission, NMC. I enjoyed our discussions in many meetings we had back in 2016 and 2017. I'm also honored to be on this panel with Lieutenant General Retired Edmond and Ambassador Retired William Paterson. Match has asked me to discuss the UNC organization, the initiative of Ambassador Roundtables, and United States or United Nations Command REAR. My experience with United Nations Command came as the U3, as Match mentioned, at a time of revitalization, a change, a move to separate the hatch or commands under the command of General Retired Brooks. There was a renewed emphasis, be it the oldest command of the three hats, to bring this forward and to place more importance on the UN command, but also on UN command REAR, a critical enabler for the sending state flow and support of UN command forward. The Ambassador Roundtable discussions were and continue to be a powerful forums for the 22 sending state ambassadors. Each of these revitalization efforts was initiated by General Scaparrotti and taken to a different level by General Retired Brooks, followed by General Abrams, retired, as well as General Camera, the current UNC commander. I believe it's important to provide a brief history of how far we have come and the changes that have been made to the United Nations Command Organization. 1950, United Nations Command was the warfighting headquarters until it transitioned its warfighting authority and responsibility on 7 November 1978 to the Combined Forces Command. It was at this point that the Combined Forces Headquarters or Combined Forces Command, the United Nations Command staffs became intertwined with United Nations Command, now transitioning to a support role. That's important. United Nations Command to a support role. It is also important to note that the United Nations Command owns no combat forces with this change, and USFK remained at the time a separate command. 1992, all three commands, United Nations Command, Combined Forces Command, United States Forces Korea, became intertwined. A four-star commander and the staff maintained three different distinct hats, still with some blending, operated from the White House in Seoul. For me, as a new three, it was a steep learning curve. With the importance of quickly studying and understanding the authorities and reporting that apply to each hat or command you are operating in. That's important. It's called staying in your lane. There's no other command in the world like this, where a commander and his staff respond to different events and must avoid the blending of authorities and reporting change depending on the event itself. Was this confusing to our alliance partners? Absolutely. And to our staffs at times. From 2016 to 2018, there was a concerted effort by General Retired Brooks to detwine the three hats or commands and redefine the staff roles and responsibilities with an emphasis placed on separating the commands. Many, many whiteboard sessions. Today, United Nations Command has moved into a headquarters at Camp Humphreys, Korea, with an established chain of command. An organization is fully functional and led by an incredible team. The four-star remains, US four-star remains the commander of United Nations Command, with his third deputy commander, a British three-star who has followed a Canadian and an Australian. The detwining from the United States Forces Command and the build of the sending state nations command team has led to a multinational staff of 50 with a goal of 70. 7 of the 16 sending state nations who provided forces for combat operations from 1950 to 1953 represent the command and staff today. The United Nations Command also includes United Nations Command Military Armistice Commission, UNCMAC Secretariat. The Secretariat is responsible for negotiating and implementing the terms of the Armistice Agreement, which is a living document, military document necessary for maintaining security and stability of the Korean Peninsula until diplomacy can achieve lasting peace. Additional elements of the United Nations Command include United Nations Command Security Battalion, consisting of 600 personnel, the combined battalion of ROC and US personnel, and finally the Honor Company, which is representative members of the sending states. The United Nations Command has roughly 900 personnel. Another organization that was part of the revitalization effort was United Nations Command Rear. UNC Rear operates with a headquarters and a small staff that operates from 7 different locations in Japan that are multi-use, used by the Japanese Self-Defense Forces and the U.S. Forces Japan. U.S. Forces Japan provides support of peace in the Northeast Asia by conducting functions of UNC in Japan to ensure the Armistice Agreement continues to provide a vehicle for sending state contributions to the UNC mission. UNC Rear supports the transit and operation of UNC sending state forces through Japan during the armistice at designated UNC facilities. The UNC Rear is governed by a status of force agreement that allows sending states to exercise movement of aircraft, ships, and personnel to UN bases in Japan and under the UN flag. Excuse me. The sending states are able to rehearse the procedures necessary to conduct missions during a contingency and to enable the U.S. Forces Japan to enhance their preparedness to support sending state forces with either transit through or operate from Japan. All logistic support from visiting sending state forces provided by the United States Forces Japan. The UNC agreement under the SOFA allows UN bases in Japan to provide that support. Finally, a great initiative under revitalization of the United Nations Command, General Scaparetti brought together the UNC and neutral nations ambassadors and military liaisons for the first roundtable session on 23 January 2014. As I mentioned before, this is a powerful session. The first roundtable provided the armistice update from the UNC Military Armistice Commission representative. The roundtable discussions have proved to be very powerful, giving each participant equal standing in the discussion and enable them to contribute their perspectives and ideas freely and fully. The roundtable discussions happen monthly. However, due to COVID, at times has hampered the ability to come together to discuss the current events. Matt, that's all I have for my opening comments. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I'll let the other 3 speakers take their turn before we come back and have our discussion. So with that, I would like to turn to Lieutenant General retired Chunyun. General Boom has held numerous commands as a battalion, regimental, and division commander, as well as several key appointments, one being the director of the OPCON transition group, which is one of the things we are discussing today, at the Republic of Korea Joint Chiefs of Staff in 2008 and 9. In 2013, he became the Deputy Chief of Staff for Combined Forces Command and also the senior member of the United Nations Military Armistice Commission, deeply involved in the day-to-day operations of the UNC. Later that year, he was promoted to Lieutenant General and was assigned as the commander of the ROC Special Warfare Command. And his last military assignment was as Deputy Commander for the ROK 1st Army. After leaving active service, General Chun conducted several distinguished fellowships at Brookings, Johns Hopkins, and Georgia Tech. And he has also been a very honorable guest researcher at ISDP here in Stockholm. With that, Boom, please, the world is yours.
First, let me echo the thanks to ISDP and hellos to all of you. The United Nations Command is under attack, and because I believe it is beneficial to understand the logic of this attack, I will be the devil's advocate today, and as best as I can, present the accusations from, surprisingly, not only North Korea, but progressive elements in South Korea. The critics of the United Nations Command have a simple logic. How come Koreans cannot have ownership of the DMZ? It is my land, and it should be my right to go in and out as I please. This is silly, but it sounds very convincing to the average Korean. They use the examples of A, the delay of delivery of Tamiflu to the North Koreans, B, denied access for South Korean dignitaries who were especially involved in inter-Korean activities, and finally, access to peace trails inside and along the DMZ. Most of these are factually incorrect, but the accusers have chosen to not listen to the explanations, which leads me to conclude that their intent and purpose is not sincere. The accusers also accuse that the United States is using the UNC to regulate the speed of inter-Korean relations and as a means to involve the United States in the unification process through the UN command. They also accuse that the United Nations command is going beyond the management of the Armistice Agreement and expanding to the crisis management of the Korean Peninsula. Now, I see nothing wrong in this, but they make it sound as if this is something very wrong. Some have even gone so far as to accuse the revitalization of the United Nations command with a deputy commander from Canada, Australia, and now from the UK as an effort to turn the United Nations command into a multinational force on the Korean Peninsula. They conclude that the US could be seeking to turn the UNC into a Northeast Asian security organization, something like NATO. They also point to the fact that the United Nations command does not receive orders or guidance from the UN itself, but rather from the US Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is factually true, and therefore is a de facto that the UNC is a de facto US organization. And the ultimate goal of the United Nations command is for the United States to control the Korean Peninsula. This is a leap of logic that is absurd, but again, a lot of people believe it. These accusations are so absurd that it seems to be unworthy of a response, but the continuous allegations are dangerous for the security of the Korean people and needs a concerted effort to inform and educate the Korean people so that they can make their own informed decisions. Some points that must be emphasized are that the United Nations Command was formed in response to a North Korean invasion of the Republic of Korea. This is the legitimate reason that the UNC is here, and a lot of people have forgotten this, so this must be reminded. Secondly, that the United Nations Command remains a belligerent in the conflict. It is not a peacekeeping operation. UNSCR 84 authorizes the UNC to fly the UN flag, but it's not a peacekeeping operation. Many people don't realize this. We must also remind the UNC's mission, which is to enforce the Armistice Agreement, coordinate sending states' contributions, and execute assigned functions to resolve peace and security on the Korean Peninsula. So the Korean people need to understand that the United Nations Command is here to restore peace and security on the Korean Peninsula. It is important for the public to understand that the UNC is a coalition of countries that make up a ready-made standing combined joint task force, postured to reinforce the ROK-US alliance in armistice and in crisis with both critical, conventional, and other capabilities across all the war fighting domains. This is a great force enhancer. People seem to think that war can be won easily. We must educate the public on this. Also, we must stress that the UNC has an enduring commitment to peace and security in the region. The United Nations Command demonstrates this through enforcement of the Armistice Agreement. So again, the United Nations Command is committed to peace and security of Korea, not the control of the Korean Peninsula. Finally, and most importantly, the United Nations Command is a US-led multinational command that provides the Republic of Korea international support and symbolizes legitimacy. United Nations Command harnesses the support of 22 nations and can legitimize alliance actions. I strongly believe that we must engage the Korean public and the Korean media more. We need to engage more with the Korean public so that they can understand these critical issues as well as facts, and explain to them that some of the accusations that are being made are factually incorrect, and that the truth is and the most important truth is that the United Nations Command contributes to the peace and stability of the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Boom, for allowing us to reflect on the some of the negative comments about UNC that is it can be often be read from South Korean media. And with this, I would like to turn to Ambassador retired Bill Paterson from Australia, who will give us a perspective as a so-called sending state on this issue. Ambassador Paterson is currently a senior fellow at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, where he focuses on Korea and North Asia security-related issues. He is also a visiting fellow at the Australian National University Strategic and Defence Studies Centre, where he teaches intelligence. He has been the Australian ambassador to South and North Korea from 2013 to 16, and between 2005 and 8, he was also the ambassador to Thailand. After retiring, Ambassador Paterson for 3 years worked as a senior analyst at Australia's Office of National Intelligence, where he had a particular focus on the United States. It's very happy to have you on board, even though it's late evening in Australia, Bill. So please, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Matt, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you to ISDP for hosting this event. Australia is one of the most active of the sending state members of the UN Command for Korea, and I'd just like to talk a little about how did this come about and why do we continue to attach both legitimacy and value to it. In preparing for today, I'm indebted to Tony McCormack, who some of you know, for his advice and knowledge on the UNC. Tony is a former commander of UNC REA and later was Australia's first one-star embed in USFK, double-hatted to the UNC. Let me recap a little history. Australia committed air and naval units to the Korean War on 29th of June 1950, less than a week after North Korean forces pushed south of the 38th parallel. Why this is interesting is that this was over a week before the United Nations Security Council agreed in in Security Council Resolution 84 of 7th of July to formation of the UN Command under US leadership. And in fact, the Australian Air Force flew their first combat sortie on the 2nd of July. Our decision was essentially driven by a quite separate set of events. Fearful of a revival of Japanese militarism, Australia was pressing a somewhat reluctant United States to enter a security treaty with Australia as quid pro quo for Australian acceptance of the peace treaty with Japan. The Korean commitment demonstrated to the US that post-war Australia was prepared to put its limited military muscle behind US leadership. We subsequently committed ground troops on 26 July ahead of the UK to demonstrate an independent decision, again aimed at building support in the US for a security treaty. It worked. The ANZUS Security Treaty was signed in September 1951, and the alliance remains at the heart of Australia's defence relationships and its defence posture. So our entry into the Korean War was informed less about concern for South Korea, which few Australians knew anything about at the time, and more about advancing our case for a formal alliance relationship with the United States. Still, we were concerned also about China's fall to the Communist Party in 1949 and Soviet backing for North Korea's communists, and the threat that these represented to peace and stability in the region. For a country that was still suffering the effects of the Second World War, Australia's commitment to the Korean War of 18,000 personnel from all three services was a significant one. 340 Australians lost their lives there. Let me turn now to what happened after the Korean War through to today. Australia's remained an active participant, sometimes the most active of the sending states in the UN Command since the armistice that ended the fighting in 1953. This has lent substance to our alliance commitment to the United States and offered opportunities to exercise with the US and Korean forces in the theatre as well, arguably as contributing to UNC's armistice enforcement, multinational planning, and deterrent roles. It also demonstrated to the Republic of Korea that Australia was committed to its integrity and to maintaining a fragile peace on the peninsula. But although we recognised the ROK, we still didn't have diplomatic relations, in fact, until 1961. Over the following 60 years, Korea's importance to Australia grew steadily and at times rapidly, to a point where it's now Australia's third largest export market and fourth largest trade and investment partner overall. Both countries proclaim we're like-minded middle powers with shared values and objectives in the Indo-Pacific. But governments on both sides were slow to accord the relationship importance. And I think attention by both can still be somewhat intermittent. Bilateral defence relations, separate from our multilateral UN command commitment, have only developed momentum in recent years and still have a long way to go. And General Chun might have a view on this, but I think it hasn't been easy to convince Korea of the value of our participation in the UN command. During my time as ambassador, I felt Korea saw the UN command as something of a relic and an infringement on its sovereignty, a body operating on its territory, concerned with its national security, but a body of which it was not a member. As such, Korea sees Korean Peninsula defense as essentially a US-Korean business. Given the parlous state of its relations with Japan, the ROK is also reluctant to recognize the logistical and other importance of the UN Command RIA based in Japan. The UN Command's investigations in its UNCMAC armistice management role were also often an irritation to the ROK, which wanted a free hand in managing its de facto border and other issues with North Korea. Well, why is the UNC important to Australia? There are a number of reasons why we've continued to participate and attach value to the UNC. The UNC adds multilateral cooperation and weight to deterrence, signaling to the North that not just the US and Korea, but the wider international community have a stake in continued observance of the armistice, and that renewed hostilities will have wide costs and likely meet a broad international military as well as diplomatic response. It's notable, I think, that 3 of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council are participants in the UNC. And UN authority legitimizes the purposes of this cooperation and presence at international law, even though, of course, China and Russia were not part of the original Security Council decisions and would oppose, I think, such an interpretation. Related to this is the critical, I would argue, almost existential importance for Australia of a peaceful North Asia. Our major trading partners, China, Japan, ROK, Taiwan, and the US are all located in the region, and supply chain disruptions, not least, could rapidly cripple the Australian economy. UN Command exercises practice coordination in the event of a contingency, preparing likely participants for roles should they be needed. The exercises, both desktop and real, enable us to interact with and better understand Korean forces, particularly as the value of bilateral defence cooperation for Australia has grown for Australia, and the scheduling of bilateral exercises can sometimes be difficult. This has become more important as the sophistication of Korean forces has grown, and Australia has recently begun to acquire items of Korean defence hardware. We can also train together on US and other platforms, which both countries have in their inventory. The Korean Air Force and the Australian Air Force both operate Wedgetail and KC-30 tankers, which the US doesn't. So there's real scope to work together on those. And of course, participation enhances our interoperability with our alliance partner, the US. What about our profile in the UN Command? We maintain a small military detachment at UN Command headquarters at Camp Humphreys, south of Seoul, and troop rotations happen annually to participate in the UN Command's annual exercises. Australia also has an embedded one-star general officer in USFK, double-hatted to undertake UN Command duties. Since 2010, Australia has also commanded UN Command rear in Japan, a now permanent Australian billet. Japan's hosting of the UN Command would be critical in a contingency, enabling force flow, logistics and resupply, and not least, facilitating non-combatant evacuation operations. From 2017 to 2021, an Australian three-star officer, together with his staff, served as deputy commander at the UN Command. A Canadian officer preceded him, and a British officer has now rotated into the position, which is a clear indication that the key Five Eyes partners value the stabilizing, planning, and coordination roles of the UNC, as well as the signals participation sends about commitment to peace on the peninsula. Finally, a couple of words about just looking to the future. Australia's vigorously supported the intent of US commanders in recent years to reinvigorate the UN Command, believing that aside from armistice enforcement, there's a real need to ensure the UN Command can act as an effective enabler of coalition contributions and mesh with US ROK, Combined Forces Command, in warfighting in the event of a future contingency. Planning and practice is essential. Building a workable framework without knowing the size and shape of likely contributions is difficult, but essential. Attention has turned to where the UN Command fits into the ROK-US strategic transformation and the impact of OPCON transfer when this is resolved. The ROK still has a strong desire for greater strategic autonomy, and underlined by alliance uncertainties created by the Trump administration, and as well concern that US forces could be diverted and preoccupied by a Taiwan or other Indo-Pacific crisis. The ROK may need partners and capabilities that a pressured and distracted US may not be in a position to provide. While the ROK is modernizing and transforming its armed forces and building a significant defense industrial capability, it needs to factor in the niche capabilities the UN Command can provide, which can give it additional weight, both diplomatic and military, that the US alone cannot provide. And short of a contingency, the ROK should acknowledge, I think, the deterrent impact the UN Command brings, a benefit that could be at risk if the UN Command were to be dissolved as part of a peace treaty or an end of war declaration on the peninsula. I'll leave it at that for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bill, for providing us with a perspective from one of the very active, as you said, sending states, which are part of the United Nations Command. With this, our three introductory remarks are finished, and I would like to open up if any of our three speakers would like to comment or question something that one of your colleagues said during the introduction.
Matt, so I'd like to respond to Chunyun's comments and the ambassador as well. The ambassador said something very important. Does the UN Command provide a deterrent effect? Of course it does, because of the sending state contributions that it provides on a basis, especially during a contingency as well. Part of your comment earlier, Edmond, was about education of the South Korean people in terms of what is the UN command. Again, they on a day-to-day basis, the UNCMAC, the Secretariat, works very hard in concert with the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission, NNNC, to maintain the armistice, to ensure that both sides are in compliant. More importantly, for the safety for the South Korean people who live in a world of again, it's one that they enjoy, the things that we also enjoy here in the States too as well. The other part too is that communications. UNCMEC Secretariat, along with NNC, has an open dialogue with the North, and it's one that 2018. I'll bring this is an important event that occurred, and that was the repatriation of our UN forces, and those that we were able to get our war dead back. That was a coordinated effort through the Singapore talks that allowed us to get our war dead back, to include our great South Koreans who were partnered with us during that war, to bring them back and reunite them with their families. And so there is a dialogue that occurs. The other part too is, along the DMZ, there are tours of education that occur, and it happens along military as well as civilian side of it, to where the Korean folks are allowed to go up and see and get the briefings required that really educate them on why the DMZ is there. And I think it's important that that continues, and it does. Obviously, with the pandemic and so on, that is stymied things a bit, but it continues. UNC it's got a proud history, and alongside the people of South Korea, and of course we maintain through UMSCR 82 through 85 those things that have to be managed and observed daily on the DMZ.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. May I also encourage now all the audience to ask questions, and please use the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen to ask questions. We have plenty of time left for questions, so I encourage all of you to ask questions to these three experts we have today. Anyone else would like to comment from our speakers? Okay, I would like to take the opportunity and to follow up on some of the things that was said about the, I think you phrased it, Imbom, that UNC is under attack. Could you maybe highlight for us if and in what way the UNC is featuring in the presidential campaign at the moment? And also to explain for our audience, if I may ask you, Mike, to tell us a little bit about what is de facto the role of UNC in the DMZ? I think it's worded like have some administrative oversight or civilian control and access. So if I turn the floor first to you, Imbom, and then to Mike to try to explain what is this about?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that question, because it's quite disturbing that the progressive candidate is basically saying that he's going to get rid of the DMZ, and the conservative candidate is saying that he's going to open the DMZ for more visits inside the DMZ, make it more accessible. And again, to me, it fortifies my belief that we must inform the Korean public, some of which are very hostile to the United Nations command for very odd reasons. And I'm also concerned that senior Korean leaders who should know better are going on radio and accusing the UNC of meddling in Korean affairs. I mean, it's hard to believe that they would be ignorant of the facts, but you know, these are knowledgeable people who are going on the radio and TV and accusing the UNC of being a tool for getting into inter-Korean relations. So that this is very disturbing. I read the Q&A question, and the question is, what should the United Nations Command do to initiate a better public relations? I think we should do exactly what the Korean military does, which is engage with the hostile media and, you know, the general public. And I believe that for the United Nations Command, they should take full use of the Korean two-star that is a part of the United Nations Command, the senior member. He could regularly come in contact and have exchanges with the Korean media, show them tours, explain to them the facts, and explain that a lot of the things that they think they know is factually incorrect. And we need to be more aggressive in these activities because, in my view, right now we are losing the battle of winning the hearts and minds of the Korean people, and this is very dangerous. And I also believe that, you know, we need to make sure that the younger generation, the next generation, is more amply educated than right now. And I'll end it there.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Mike, trying to explain what is in fact the UNC's role and responsibility within the DMZ, which is one of the issues that has been discussed now.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. You know, the Armistice Agreement that was created was pretty clear in terms of the requirements to manage and monitor, you know, the demarcation line, which is the center line with 2 kilometers each side, one in the north and of course the south, and that's, you know, that's managed by the Military Armistice Commission, and it's supervised by them. You know, neither side shall execute any hostile act, of course, against the DMZ. That's a part of it. But more importantly, you talked about the going, you know, the travel to and from. You know, no person, military, civilian, shall be permitted to cross military demarcation line unless specifically authorized to do so by the Military Armistice Commission. Again, this is one that is tracked very, very carefully on a daily basis to ensure that you know, both sides are in compliance in terms of the approvals of those that are coming and going. The key thing is making sure that you know, that the North understands clearly too as well that this is part of the agreement that was agreed upon in 1953. You know, no person, military, civilian in the DMZ shall be permitted to enter the territory under the military control of either side unless specifically authorized to do so by the commander into whom the territory entry is sought. It's pretty clear, and it's one that UNCMAC and the Secretary daily to include the MAC also track that very, very carefully. And then, of course, no person, military, civilian shall be permitted to enter the DMZ except persons concerned with the conduct of civil administration and relief in persons specifically authorized to enter by the Military Commission. I think our team that's currently there in the DMZ does a phenomenal job by managing this piece and ensuring that there is compliance across the board with the great leadership that's there, and ensuring that both sides are in compliant, not just one, both are in compliant with the measures found in the agreement. Over.
Thank you very much. It's great. We have a couple of questions coming in, and I will start taking them. We have a question from Ju Won Lee, and I think this is directed to you, Bill. Do you think more participation of sending states than the Five Eyes will benefit the purpose and appeal to the ROK people?
I think if that's addressed that question to me, yes. But of course, there are a range of countries. I think what there were originally 17 ascending state countries in the UNC. Some of them have become inactive, but the participation, certainly in my time in Seoul, went way beyond the Five Eyes and included a number of key Europeans, Asian countries, South Africa, and others. So there is this wider participation and to some degree participation at the military level in addition to the diplomatic level. But why I mentioned the Five Eyes, I think the Five Eyes put a bit more muscle, a bit more emphasis, a bit more priority on this than some of the others. It obviously, the Korean War is a long time ago. If you live in another part of the world, other priorities have arisen, and for some countries, the importance of participation in UN Command has probably diminished somewhat. But I think for serious thinkers about global strategic affairs, a contingency, a North Korean contingency or a North Asian contingency would be globally devastating, and therefore I think we and some of our Five Eyes partners, but also some of the others who participate in the UNC, recognize that this is to be avoided at all costs, and the UNC can play a useful deterrence and planning role in trying to avoid this and to make a serious contribution if it were to come about.
Okay, thank you very much. We have another question here from Mr. Sang-Soo Lee. Thank you for a very interesting discussion today. I understand offering the end of war declaration can't guarantee North Korea's denuclearization anytime soon, and understand the US is concerned that the declaration could undermine the role of UNC, the end of war declaration, I suppose that it's, and US military presence in South Korea. However, if the nuclear issue was solved through diplomatic negotiations, how would the role of UNC be changed? Any possibility it could become a framework for military cooperation against China? I think maybe Mike, if you would like to take that first.
Sure. Yeah, Max, it's been in the press talking about the end of war declaration and so on, but until the conditions are met by UNSCR 82 to 85 are resolved, as agreed by the UN and the Armistice Agreement, is replaced, by a permanent diplomatic treaty. Again, this is one of those where UNC supports all initiatives that will bring a permanent diplomatic peace treaty to the Korean Peninsula, but the conditions have to be met too as well. General Brooks in a past webinar, talked about this in terms of, and I hope I get this right, what does a UNC look like in the future? Once those conditions are met, you still have to go through a transition to peace. You may have an end of war declaration that occurs, but what about peace in itself and the measures and the process that go through demilitarization? Again, kind of working through that side of it. And what does that look like? This would have to be an agreement that goes United States back to UN of what the UNC would look like in the future, because that's the steps in the process it goes through. But this is one of those that, again, it's unknown what that's going to look like. The other part too is, the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission. Is that one in terms of the work that they've done and the great work they've done? Do they play a role in what that may look like in the future if there's in fact a transition? But again, you still have to have an organization, an element that has to oversee the process as they move forward into the peace side of it. But until those resolutions under UNSCR's 82 through 85 resolved, that's not going to happen at this point.
Okay, thank you very much. We have more questions. One here from Mr. Asfew, a PhD student. He's asked about the United Nations Command mission and activities on the peninsula, and if there is any problems facing now, and also the South Korean government's commitment to support the cooperation with the UN forces or the UN command, because so maybe if I could direct this question to Chunyun, please.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the fact of the matter is that the present Korean government is suspicious of the nature of the United Nations Command. And unfortunately, the administration, the Korean administration, seems to be unable to understand the value of the United Nations Command. And therefore, it seems to me their suspicions are prohibiting them from the kinds of status or participation that the Koreans should be providing and should be conducting. So it's just the realities of the Korean government at this point. Now, having said that, I'm not too sure that the conservatives have any better idea. So that's why I'm saying that we really need to get the public to be more aware of the facts and the activities and the goals of the United Nations Command and what it provides for the Korean people. Because unless we do this, this kind of situation that we're having right now is going to continue for the foreseeable future.
Thank you. This seems to, I have another question from Miss Ferido Bolin. I think this is something of a $64,000 questions to all of you. From a realistic point of view, North Korea, and everyone knows who is behind her, North Korea's erratic and irrational behavior of causing widespread anxiety from testing nuclear weapons and ballistic capabilities. Why won't the US and allies, especially South Korea and Japan, launch a preemptive surgical strike on North Korea's nuclear establishment? It will be a fait accompli situation, but this will pave for peace. So anyone want to try to take on that question? The possibility of a preemptive strike taking out North Korea's nuclear arsenal, in short.
Well, if nobody else wants to kick this off, I suppose I could say something, Mats, but
Yeah,
I'm not
you.
an expert. I'm not an expert on this, and I'd look to General Bills and General Chun to perhaps comment. But my understanding is that a surgical strike taking out North Korea's nuclear facilities and its nuclear weapons quickly and easily before they could retaliate is simply not feasible. And not only that, you're always reminded when you live in Seoul that the North has a very extensive conventional artillery capability that could be launched in effect on a moment's warning and do enormous damage to Seoul and beyond. So surgical strikes are really a nonsense. It can't be accomplished. And I think also the North has hardened its facilities. It's diversifying its capability. We're seeing them now developing submarine-launched ballistic missiles, etc. So even if you could take out land-based facilities, before long we may well face a more difficult target in terms of mobile undersea forces as well. But I think that's enough for an amateur. I'd prefer to hear from the experts on this one.
Hey, Matt's staying on topic, UN command. and that's where I'm going to remain. The important objective of UN Command is to prevent the resumption of hostilities. That's the whole purpose of UN Command. And again, it's preserving the armistice, as we've talked about in the past. It's also enabling that dialogue through diplomatic means. And again, providing for a home of international commitments for our great sending states. But more important thing here is that, again, prevent the resumption of hostilities. That's why we're here.
Yep. Okay. I have another question, and it's and I will take more of the questions from our audience as well. But one of the things I was wondering, I want to direct it to you, Bill, and it was mentioned by Mike as well about this vitalization effort to bring more sending states actively engaged in UNC operations, and both by introducing this roundtable discussions and meetings. Was it during your time a discussion among the sending states ambassador to try to let's encourage more international manning within the UNC? I mean, Australia has, as you mentioned, a small permanent staff, and some other countries as well, but it's still limited to 6-7 nations that are actively participating. So was there this kind of discussion, and would you see that as a strength and a benefit to UNC to have more international engagement actively in South Korea?
Well, I certainly think so. I think it would benefit existing sending states as well as those that join, if they sought to ramp up their participation. But I do think it gets back to some of the smaller, as I mentioned before, some of the smaller countries. Since the Korean War, the geopolitical picture has changed for them, and they have different priorities. We happen to think that the contingency on the Korean Peninsula ranks as an absolute first-ranking global concern. But others with limited capabilities, and of course we live in the region, so it matters to us. But some others with limited capabilities may see less value in this. But I think the cross-fertilization of ideas and expertise would, in any case, be valuable to all participants or potential participants, should they choose to elevate their participation.
Hey, Matt's a comment?
Yes, please.
General Scaparrotti, back in 2014-15 timeframe, really looked at, UN Command as the oldest command itself. And one that has that third command, the attention wasn't being given to it enough. And he went through an effort, so did General Brooks and later General Abrams and now General LaCamera, to really bring in more sending states. Obviously the 16 that fought on the Pen, and increase that staff in separating those hats or as part of those commands to where they can operate as an organization in terms of the things we have already talked about, of enforcing and managing the Armistice Agreement, but also what the sending states bring to contingencies or even during armistice. The ambassador talked about some of the limitations. Sending states will come with caveats. Those caveats may say that we can only participate to a certain point. That's okay. More the better in terms of sending state participation as we look at building this team. And they've done a phenomenal job at this point of building that team to 50, going to 70. But remember, it's a multinational piece in terms of working very closely, not just with the US, but also with our Korean partners. But it also provides enablers that provide that support and that safety to the South Korean people in time of contingency. So they play a huge role as the UN manages that piece in terms of support of CFC. And I have to keep saying that because that changed in 1978. So that the sending states are there to support CFC and the ROCs and their military, who provide the safety and the ability to live freely in South Korea.
Thank you. We'll take some more questions here from our very active audience. Thank you all for posting questions. This is from a familiar face, Mr. John Brzezinski. During General Abraham's tenure, UNC began posting info almost daily on its activities, especially in the DMC. John Hap and Rock Media are reporting on this. Do you see this as an effective tool to influence rock populace? Maybe I can direct that to you, Imboom. And here's another one for you as well, from Mr. Stedry. South Korea as an independent and sovereign nation, it is no longer the war-torn nation it used to be. It now has twice the population of North Korea, somewhere over 30 times the economy capability. Why is it wrong for South to want to reclaim all of their sovereignty and control of their entire territory, especially as it relates to engagement with North Korea? So those two, please, to you, Imboom.
Yeah, thank you for those questions. Of course, that kind of public engagement is appreciated. Some of the things that I find a little bit lacking is the Korean translation that is often that comes with it. Sometimes I fear that they use Google Translate and it really comes out very disturbing. And it, quite frankly, it makes the United Nations Command look foolish. So that kind of activity does help, but we need more than that. And I mentioned that we need to use the Korean senior member and the Korean staff that are in the United Nations Command at present more to engage with the Korean media so that they can talk and have a place where they have a person to be able to answer some questions instead of somebody at the staff level who does not have all the facts, giving out dubious information, which causes suspicion and confusion. Is it wrong? No, it's not wrong, but there needs to be a process, agreements, and dialogue. And I think that that's what people like myself are concerned about, that people think that, for instance, end of war or a peace treaty is going to solve all our problems. I believe that if that were the case, there would be no more war for mankind. So for the Koreans to do all these things, that it's not wrong, and but we need to have a process that will ensure the security of the Korean people. And so that's the only thing that I am concerned about, and I'm sure many of others who are interested in Korean security are as well.
Anyone else like to fill in on this, the question that Imboom just responded to? Okay, we have several more. This comes from Tony McCormack. Thank you, gentlemen, for presentation. Great discussion on important topic. One of the deficiencies with UNC is the lack of any legal protection for UN forces in Korea. The Status Forces Agreement in Japan allows a number of sending states to deploy there to assist, yet there is nothing on the peninsula. Do you believe that a visiting forces agreement should be negotiated to enable UNC forces to rapidly deploy should that be required? So anyone, maybe Mike, to start off, please?
I'd like to get Imboom to respond to that one first.
Okay.
Thanks, Mike. I think that it's basically a sofa for the sending states. It's something that the Korean government should be eagerly supporting. It's one of the frustrating aspects of the Korean government that they are unwilling to do so because of, again, in my view, unwarranted suspicions towards the United Nations Command. And I'm not sure the Korean public really understands what's at stake and what's being talked about. So this is another area that the Korean public needs to be informed about. And the Korean people can make their decision. But right now, in my view, they don't have all the facts. They don't know what's going on. And if they did know that visiting forces here are not getting the legal protection that they deserve, quite frankly, it's ridiculous. And I just can't understand why this is not being supported by the Korean government.
Just a quick comment, Matt. I think the VFA is one that has to be a quick process. It has to be one that has the capabilities identified, either in armistice or in crisis, has to move very quickly through Japan onto the pen itself in terms of support for CSC, because that's where eventually it's going to go, or to a point where if there's caveats. But again, with VFAs, that's got to be a very quick, well thought out process, but one that approves for those capabilities, especially if you don't have the capability yourself on the pen to support armistice or crisis. It's one that, again, our sending states provide some tremendous capabilities and ones that could be needed if necessary. But a VFA and a quick process is one that is needed.
But would that be am I correct then in understanding that the lack of a visiting forces agreement could delay support of sending states forces in a contingency on the peninsula?
We get the ambassador to answer that question.
I mean, if I were
So sorry, Matt.
no problem.
Should I butt in there and say it's not just the issue of a visiting forces agreement between Korea and the UN command, but as General Chun knows, I spent 3 years working on the Korean Ministry of Defense to try and get negotiations underway on a bilateral visiting forces agreement with Australia. In my last weeks in the job, they agreed to do this, and shortly after my departure, they pulled the plug and no longer agreed. At a time when Korea is taking a bigger role for regional security, this is a bit of a problem for us in terms of our exercising bilaterally on the peninsula, but it's also an issue for Korean forces participating in exercises in Australia. Certainly, I think it's something that the Korean government should take a much more positive approach towards.
Okay, thank you very much. One element or one perspective we haven't talked about yet, but we have a question that raises the question and introduces North Korea into our discussion, and it's from Unchul Park. And he directs the questions to you, Ambassador Paterson. You are a rare case as a diplomat to serve in South Korea and North Korea. What is the view of North Korean high officials on the United Nations Command in South Korea? Are they hostile to United Nations Command as to US forces in South Korea? Is UNC beneficial to loosen tension between the two countries in the long run?
From time to time, we address this in our very robust discussions with North Korean officials. But the answer always came back, I think, that North Korea considers the UN command an illegitimate, even illegal body. It goes back to how it was created in the UN when the only two allies that North Korea had, the Soviet Union and China, were absent from the security. Well, China was not a member of the UN at the time, and Soviet Union was absent from that session of the UN. Hence, North Korea, I think, believes the UN command is illegitimate and should be disbanded. General Edmond, you know some of this. They also were not happy with the neutral nations, a supervisory commission as well. And in fact, in the end, the two countries that worked on this north of the border were expelled. So I don't think we can look to any cooperation or any positive view from North Korea on the value of the UN Command, or indeed the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission.
Thank you. A question that maybe Mike and Mbum would like to answer. In 2018, North Korea and South Korea agreed a number of confidence and security building measures, often referred to as the Comprehensive Military Agreement. And in what way did this change the security situation in the DMZ? And also, how did it change the tasks and role, if any, of UNC in trying to implement the agreement?
Match, I'll pass it to Edmond first, especially with the thoughts of the Korean people. You know, the buffer, the NLL, the Han River estuary, all have been very sensitive things, even before 2018, that applied to fishing rights and so on. That's an example. But again, with the CMA impact, Edmond, I think, on that agreement and what's occurred between what you think in terms of the security along the demarcation line, but more importantly, the NLL and any violations that may have occurred that have caused some consternation.
Yes, thank you. I personally believe that the comprehensive military agreement was a worthwhile effort to engage with North Korea, and at that time a new North Korean leader with a new South Korean government. So it was worthwhile. The biggest benefit I see is the lowering of tensions along the NLL. We've had a lot of instances in that area, but the CMA has contributed to lowering those kind of tensions along the Western NLL, the northern limit line. Having said that, it took some time for the frontline units to fully understand what the CMA allowed and did not allow. And so it's made it quite harder for the tactical level commanders to train in those areas. And we've had a slight degradation in some of our capabilities as well. But again, we had to give peace a chance. Now, it's been 3 years plus. And I think North Korea really needs to show us that they are sincere about their agreement, because right now they're using that agreement to make allegations and demands upon the alliance, which is again just another remake of communist strategy and tactics. So it's not very healthy for the establishment of peace on the Korean Peninsula. Hopefully the CMA will contribute for a further development of the Korean peace, but we'll have to see what happens with the new government in South Korea, which will be coming soon within about 4 months. So we'll have to wait and see what happens.
That's
Any follow-up, Mike?
Yeah, on the same line as some of the training areas that were lost during that period. You know, we co-utilized a partnership between Korea and the U.S. And again, to lose those training areas, we would lose that ability to train to certain standards and have to look for other locations to train. That's also become an issue too, as well, in terms of our ability to train in certain locations and to keep air crews, tank crews, you name it, across the board, proficient in what they do. And so when you start losing that ground that was beneficial to maintaining the readiness side of it, It's one that, again, we've fought hard to locate other locations. It's been a challenge, but it's one that doesn't go without some hardship in terms of trying to get people trained to their ability and the standards that they're supposed to be, especially with the cooperation that we've had to a certain point with our Korean partners. And again, the CMA I think kind of affected that piece in terms of pushing us out of those areas so that we couldn't train together. Over.
Okay, thank you very much. We have some more questions still coming in, and I'll take as many as possible. This one is from Chris Smith, thanking the panelist. I'd like to ask a follow-up question regarding the possible effects of a potential end of war declaration. Noting a key argument that the UNC still remains viable is that the key tenets of the Resolution 84 still apply, as whilst the armed attack has been repelled, we are still yet to restore international peace and security in the area. With an end of war declaration established, could North Korea and other like-minded nations argue that international peace and security has now been restored and Resolution 82 to 85 can now be terminated by the Security Council? So, in short, would an end of war declaration risk terminating the foundation, the Security Council Resolution 84 for the establishment of UNC? So, anyone that'd like to take on that one? The risk for an end of war declaration impacting the foundation for UNC. Please.
Before Mike offers my view first, I'll just go first anyway. So yes, it would affect the UNC's position, and it's already being affected. So that is why we must be very careful with this end of war declaration. Now, for me personally, I'm very uncomfortable with the fact that the end of war declaration is being pursued for political purposes and not for the security of the Korean Peninsula. So that's my main concern. But having said that, there's no reason that any Korean, North or South, or any country that has interest on the Korean Peninsula that would be against an end of war or a peace treaty on the Korean Peninsula if it is sincere. And in order for it to be sincere, we need to be able to define every sentence, every noun, and every word. When a person uses the word peace, you know, throughout history, communists have used peace, the word peace, meaning to be your opponent being dead. So, you know, if that's what the North Koreans are thinking, I mean, I can't agree with that. So we need time. This has to be a deliberate process. And one of those things that needs to be looked at is how this will affect the United Nations Command. Now, the United Nations Command has a charter from the United Nations to establish a permanent peace on the Korean Peninsula. And we must ask ourselves, is this met? And if so, then the United Nations Command on the Korean Peninsula's mission is accomplished. But unless that critical question is answered, I think we need to make sure that all those fine ingredients are checked. So the key word here is that the United Nations brings a permanent diplomatic peace to the Korean Peninsula. Will this process do this? I think is the critical question that must be answered.
Mac, I guess over to me. UNC supports all initiatives that will bring a permanent diplomatic peace treaty to the Korean Peninsula. But as I'm going to echo Edmond for his comments, again, this is one that, have we met all the requirements under UNSCR 82 and 85 and understand clearly what the mechanics are when it comes to the transition from end of war to peace. As I mentioned before, you got to go through a demilitarization of that aspect of it and understand clearly what that means. I mean, there's a lot to this, and that's a piece that has got to be resolved at a much higher level than just UN command as you pursue this piece. But I echo Edmond's comments in terms of maintaining a permanent peace on the Pen. That's what UN command does for the peninsula.
Thank you. I'd like to follow up on a question related to, and it also comes from the audience, on the role of the sending states. It's already been mentioned from several of you about the importance of the sending states. It adds both political and diplomatic legitimacy to UNC. It widens the deterrent aspects. And still, South Korea seems to be a little bit reluctant. And you mentioned this, Bill, about this discussion about the visiting forces agreement or something similar. So what is the sense and the value in Seoul of the sending states? But is it just a fact, or is it a genuine understanding that this is an important element to bring international support to South Korea? What is your opinion on that, Bill?
I think it is about, as I mentioned in my presentation, Mats, that it's about building much broader multinational weight to bear. North Korea has to take into account the fact that there's a wide international coalition concerned about its aggressive behavior, and I think the UN command brings this into focus because it's a gloved fist, if you like. It's all about potential. It says that it won't simply be the United States and the Republic of Korea that an aggression by North Korea would face, but a much wider, both diplomatic and military response. That's where the importance lies, diplomatic and military. Yep. If I can just get back while I have the floor to this issue of an end of war declaration, the impression I have is that President Moon has been very frustrated by the failure of his North Korean diplomacy and his meetings with the North Korean leader and with President Trump. He's looking for a legacy achievement before he leaves office. But that's exactly the wrong reason to do it. It's a political reason rather than a substantive reason. And I think it would be used by North Korea to drive a wedge, leading to pressure to reduce US troop levels. And who knows, if we have a second President Trump, this could easily happen. And of course, also to pressure for the termination of the UN command.
Hey, Matt, just a comment going back to the ambassador's comment on sending states and international community. General Retired Abrams at a anniversary of the armistice, and this is a quote that I pulled. It's pretty powerful in terms of the international community. But nothing contributes more to the security of South Korea is the will of the international community. I think that says it all in terms of not just the diplomatic piece, but the sending state contribution, the international contribution in terms of supporting the armistice and peace on the peninsula.
Thank you. Would you like to comment on this one, Imbom, about how UNC is perceived? Is this notion that both Bill and Mike is talking about, that there is a recognition of international support through the UNC and the activity of the sending state? Is that not
Yes.
recognized in South Korea? Or in
Yeah,
some circles anyhow?
So unfortunately, to the Koreans, there is Korea, the United States, and the rest of the world. And I think this is a very narrow view of the world. For Korea to have, sending states interested on the Korean Peninsula is very important for our security. And yet to the Koreans, and surprisingly to knowledgeable Koreans, their focus is still towards the United States, an over dependence on the United States. And I hope that that the Korean people will be able to see the great benefits that can come from all these countries coming to and having a interest on the Korean Peninsula, providing legitimacy, providing political support and all that. So the United States is our main ally, yes, and our most important ally, but we need other friends as well. And I believe that the Koreans need to realize this. And again, I would like to emphasize the fact that by informing the Korean public of the United Nations role, that maybe it would be a good catalyst for this message to be shared with the Korean people as well.
Thank you very much. We have only a very, very few minutes left of this session, this webinar. So I would like to give the opportunity to each of our speakers to have a final word. If you would please try to indicate what do you see coming? Is it a continuation of UNC as we know it, with a kind of a continuation of the current type of discussion and activities, or do you see any major or more significant change to the way UNC is set up and operates? So thank you if you would like to do that. And maybe we could start in the reverse order now. So I ask Ambassador Bill Paterson, please.
I'm not sure I'm well positioned, Mats, to talk about UNC reform, but I do think certainly in my time with General Scarperotti and General Brooks, we think we fully supported the efforts they were making to, I think, update and increase the relevance of the UN command. I imagine that process has continued under General Abrams, and I think it continues to enjoy strong Australian support. But as to the specifics, I think I'd probably leave that to my former military colleagues.
Thank you, Bill. Over to you, Imbum, please.
Thank you again. I was once asked the question, why do we need the United Nations command by a Korean? And I told them that because it's in our best interest. I think that message needs to be reiterated as much as possible through engagement with the Korean public. And once the Korean public has all the information, correct information, in fact, they can make their own decisions. But I am absolutely sure that the Koreans will realize that the United Nations command is a godsend, that the Koreans were lucky to have the United Nations command created, that the United Nations command was vital in defending the Koreans from communist invasion, that it was the main organization that kept the peace through which the Koreans were able to develop its society, and that the United Nations command will develop into a multinational task force, which will now provide worldwide network of like-minded nations, providing and guaranteeing the security of the Korean people. So there might be, some negative aspects to the United Nations Command being here. And if so, we can fix that. But I think there are more benefits here. And we can only get this message through to the Korean public if we have more engagement. So I would just like to applaud ISDP for today's session because it provides that arena, and hoping for more of these kinds of discussions.
Thank you very much, Edmond. And Mike, you get the
Matt,
last shot, please.
Yeah, Matt, I think this is the first time that I fully agree with Imba in terms of his comments. But no, I agree that the United Nations Command will continue to be a legitimate organization to provide the safety and security through the armistice for the Korean people. I think the revitalization effort that was started by General Scaparetti, continued through General Brooks, General Abrams, and General LeCamera will continue that effort as well in terms of building this fantastic team that's in place right now that on a daily basis manages and monitors the document, that military document that was approved back in 1953. So, I agree. But I also agree that maybe there's more of an information campaign that's required to inform the South Korean people about what is United Nations Command. And I know they do that with the tours that occur and the education process that occurs along the DMZ and back, but maybe more emphasis placed on that. Thanks, Matt. And thanks again to ISDP and KDVA.
Okay, thank you very, very much for a very informative and knowledgeable session. I'd like to thank all the people that has been participating, our audience being active, asking a lot of very interesting questions. And once more, I'm sorry for not having the opportunity to answer all the questions and take them on. And a special thanks all to you, our speakers. I think listening in to today's session, I think we maybe should do a little bit more to support people that think UNC, as I do, is a very important factor in maintaining peace and stability on the peninsula, to do this kind of information campaign. So hopefully we will see each other on the screen or in reality talking about the UNC in the future. Thank you very much, and all of you have a good night or a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.